Welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Research Works. I'm so glad we could get started because Marissa made me giggle the whole way through the intro.
I'm sorry.
And somehow I composed myself.
Me too. This is good.
I'm glad we could just get started. And I think we were probably a little bit on the giggly end because we do know this particular author today quite well. And so we were just joking around a fair bit and have hopefully we'll stitch them up in the icebreaker questions. So we do want to be able to welcome him onto the show today. Hello, Matthew Haddon. Woo-hoo.
Hey guys, nice to be in the studio with you this morning.
So good to have you, man. Like we said, great chatting beforehand.
Yeah.
A few giggles.
A few giggles, but I'm sure we'll be a bit more serious coming up really soon. I don't like our chances, but let's see how we go. Now, the author as the first author of this paper, we're really excited to talk about this topic because it kind of brings together a lot of our passions. I think all of us are really into this area, and I think we've talked about it to a lot of other speakers now as well, different kinds of research that's been out there. So this paper was published in 2023 and it's titled, it's very long, Kindy Moves, the feasibility of an intensive interdisciplinary program and goal and motor outcomes for preschool-aged children with neurodisabilities requiring daily equipment and physical assistance. Whew. That's a long title.
It is. I'm sorry, but also not fully my fault. It is. But
it gives a very clear picture.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
It says everything it needs to say and some more.
It's your pico, really. Yeah. It really is, isn't it? But looking forward to getting into that. Like I said, it's something we are all very, very passionate about.
Yes, I'm excited to jump into that. But before we do, it is so good to have you in the studio today, Matt. Before we jump into, I know you're a bit fearful, the icebreaker question, I do want to tell our listeners a bit more about you, Matt. So, on a serious note, Matthew Haddon is a physiotherapist currently working at the Perth Children's Hospital. He completed his honours during his undergraduate studies and followed it up by writing this paper whilst he was at the Healthy Strides Foundation as a new graduate. As a clinician now at Perth Children's Hospital, Matthew has gained experience by working in multidisciplinary rehabilitation clinics, orthopaedics, and now on rotation in plastics. A great example of how clinicians can be involved in research in such a meaningful way, contributing to this area to build knowledge and evidence.
It's very cool. Yeah. It's not an easy thing for a clinician to also do research when they don't have funded time for it. And to write up your paper post, uni after doing honours is no small thing either. So very cool. Well done. But here we go. Let's get into it. Icebreaker.
Okay, so the icebreaker question is, what is the most random or unique lunch you have ever brought to work? What makes it so random and how do other people perceive it?
Oh, wow. That is a stitch up. Because, so probably for me, so would you like me to start?
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got one, go start.
Yeah.
I have been scrutinised for my lunches over the years.
Yes, you have.
Particularly, I suppose, my method of eating lunches sometimes as well.
That is correct.
Probably the origin of where this question's coming from, I suspect, maybe around whether or not I like my food warm or cold. It may or may not be, but I think that probably one that sticks out is a pea and ham soup that I brought for lunch one time. And, did I microwave it? No, that's wasted time. That's like, who has time to microwave when, you got conversations to have and sessions to prepare for and, brain space that you want to leave free for, bigger exciting things rather than, mindlessly waiting for a microwave.
It was gelatinous, Marissa.
Texturous. It had texture to it. It was, and it tasted good. Look, I'll be honest, I very rarely microwave my food, but that one kind of pushed over the line for me. That was a bit too much.
That is awesome, Matt. I'm very impressed. Do like a pea and ham soup warmed up, though.
Yeah.
That's a whole new level.
Yeah.
That has clearly stuck with us, and I'm sure everyone in the team who helped me create this icebreaker will be pleased that we're on the right track.
Yeah.
To share that news. Yeah. Look,
Dana?
My lunches are actually always brilliant, I'd like to say. I do like to think about my food a lot, but I do feel like I'm a little bit judgy. And so this is not necessarily mine, but I'm going to bring up something that I saw a colleague eat, and it was so random, it doesn't get out of my head. So it was corn chips with mandarin segment and tinned salmon. No. That was it.
Mixed together in one bowl.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's just a bit too much for the palate, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't even get, but it's tinned salmon. So it was all that dry and then the dry from the corn chips. And I felt like I was being really judgy, but I think everyone listening would also agree that is very strange. I love this person so much, but it was very random.
Very strange flavour combination.
Very strange, isn't it? Yeah.
Maybe we're missing out. Maybe we're missing out on something. They know something we don't know. Okay.
Marissa,
okay, mine is, I'm often in a hurry. It's probably the same one, I hope. If not, I'm worried. So when I'm in a hurry, often I will just grab a tin of tuna and a small tin of chickpeas from the cupboard. Is it that one?
That's the one.
And so I'm in the kitchen. Everyone else is heating up these lovely lunches, and I've got this small tin of tuna and chickpeas I put in a bowl, and it resembles cat food, and it doesn't have a smell, and the texture is concerning.
It does have a smell for the rest of the room.
Actually, that's true. Sorry, not a nice smell. Not a heated cooking smell, I should say. But everyone looks at me like, that's a bit pitiful. But to me, it fills me up.
It does. I guess there's protein and, it's just something to line your stomach.
It is.
Does the job.
Yeah, it's functional. It's really functional.
I'll now be cautious. No.
Well, there you go. That was definitely designed to get a particular answer out. But it was good to share that with everyone. I feel like everyone knows you guys better now. Yeah. You're welcome. All right, let's get into this actual paper. So to give you a bit of a summary, let me give you a rundown of the abstract. So we know so much now about the key active ingredients which are needed to achieve the best possible outcomes in children with cerebral palsy. However, there are some gaps in knowledge with regards to how these ingredients can be applied within clinical practice, particularly given the diverse diagnostic groups many clinicians work with. This includes children with rare diseases or those that fit within the broader term of neurodisability. And further to this, how these active ingredients can be applied to a population that are younger than what is usually reported, as well as a group of children that require more physical assistance and equipment throughout the day, is not well known. There has certainly been a dearth of effective interventions having been reported in these groups. So this study, Kidney Moves, aimed to determine the feasibility of an intensive interdisciplinary program in improving goal and motor outcomes for preschool-aged children with non-progressive neurodisabilities. With feasibility being the main outcome, the areas that were explored included limited efficacy testing, acceptability, demand, implementation, and practicality. So with 40 children having been recruited in this single group feasibility study, with a mean age of 3 years and 4 months, outcomes assessed were the goal attainment scale, the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, the GMFCS, and 10-metre walk test measured at pre-intervention after 4 weeks, which consisted of 24 hours of intervention and 1 month follow-up. So the results indicated significant improvements post-intervention compared to baseline for all measures, which were also maintained at baseline. And there are some really interesting applications here that can inform our clinical practice. There you go.
Very exciting.
Very cool.
But as usual, we're going to start at the start and start with the population that we looked at, that you looked at. And can you tell us a bit more about how is neurodisability defined?
Yeah, sure. So there's a great Delphi consensus study that was completed in 2016 to achieve a bit of consensus as to what neurodisability is. And there's a lot of similarities in this definition that I'll sort of try to summarise with the cerebral palsy description that we're all familiar with. So it's defined through this consensus, Delphi consensus, as a group of congenital or acquired long-term conditions attributed to impairment in the brain and or neuromuscular system that create functional limitations. And part of the definition sort of captures that a specific diagnosis may not be found, that there's variety within people who have these conditions, that there could be associated conditions with that, and that there's different levels of complexity for each child, and also that there's often associated impairments in hearing or vision, cognition, communication, behaviour and emotion. So similar to sort of that description that we have of cerebral palsy, but capturing a little bit more of that broader population of of that sort of brain and or neuromuscular system.
That's really cool.
I think that's great, particularly in this age group where there's so many different, rare conditions that are identified, and to limit things to cerebral palsy, whilst it is obviously the most common cause of physical disability. Obviously, neurodisability just captures that wider group.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. So the question I have around that, because I think neurodisability is something that we see a lot more. Like I am seeing that, NDD is written out a whole lot more, and you have decided to go down this avenue of going neurodisability as opposed to just cerebral palsy. You've kind of just mentioned, Marissa. Why did you go down that path? Because it's for studies often, you want as most as you can a homogenous group of children. Why did you go down this path?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's certainly, heterogeneous, homogenous, always in this discussion. A few reasons. I think firstly, we know that so much of the research that we have is in those populations of children with cerebral palsy, and these children with, maybe other people described as cerebral palsy-like conditions or other neurodisabilities and non-progressive neurodisabilities are just so infrequently included in research. And look, there's more and more recognition of the genetic and metabolic etiologies behind cerebral palsy. And so, cerebral palsy in itself is so heterogeneous, and we know that. And I think with this, increasing recognition of the genetic and metabolic etiologies, that it's becoming more and more heterogeneous. And this is just another group of children who may not have that particular label, but, may have a lot of similarities as well as their distinct kind of individual characteristics. And so just including those children in research and knowing that this is a feasibility study, we weren't determining the efficacy of this intervention. And so we're, looking to see if to the neurodisability population, was this intervention acceptable, practical, could it be implemented, was there a demand for it? And I think part of that as well is that it is just like clinical practice. We're all clinicians here as well, that we don't just see children with cerebral palsy when we work in a neurodisability sort of field, that you see children with, conditions you may have never heard of, or unique genetic conditions or particular chromosomal changes. And to be able to see that this type of intervention, what we're exploring is to see whether this type of intervention is feasible for that broader neurodisability population, because that's what we see in clinical practice.
And I think it's a wonderful answer, and I think that reflects so much for so many people in the areas that they work with. Is sometimes, the criticism with some research is that, how can you apply this when there's only 1 or 2 children, and how do you actually do a study in it? And I think and that's a fair comment, but what we know more now is everyone's brains, how we learn. We understand how we learn so much more now, and it doesn't matter what diagnosis that you have. There's general principles of motor learning, right? And knowing that means, well, I guess the question is, how can we apply it in this group of children? So with that, what are those clinical practice guidelines? Like in a nutshell, I know it can be really broad, but we try to summarize it, don't we, in terms of what are the main key features that you're wanting to, I guess, implement in this intervention? Yeah,
definitely. And it's great that you mentioned sort of that those clinical practice guidelines and some of the overviews of systematic reviews are conducted or around, and the research supporting them is in that cerebral palsy population, but we don't have anything sort of else to help guide how we treat or manage the broader neurodisability population. So sort of as best as we can, we apply those clinical practice guidelines to that broader neurodisability population. But certainly in those guidelines and overviews of systematic reviews for children with cerebral palsy, it's all about being a high-intensity practice of task-specific, goal-directed activities in a way that is enriching and engaging and fun for the child, and ideally delivered in a context-specific practice. And, a really important part of that is about being hands-off and encouraging the child to initiate as much and generate as much of the movement by themselves as possible, which I know is so many other researchers who have come through this podcast. There's that consistent understanding of that's where the best available evidence is at the moment, and that's what we know is effective. It's being able to do that at a high intensity so that these children, underpinned by motor learning theories, can improve their goal and motor function outcomes.
And I mean, that's really dear to our hearts. Nothing new.
No, but
we're getting very consistent
well
with it now. That was a wonderful summary. I suppose the other thing that would be really worth just sort of laying the foundations for is further to your population of neurodisability, the reason why your title is so long is you have to say physical assistance and equipment, using that on a daily basis. So let's talk about this population, because generally when you would say this for a population with cerebral palsy, we would say it's GMFs level 3, 4 and 5. But let's talk through a little bit more about what we know about this group of kids.
Yeah, definitely. So GMFCS 3, 4 or 5 or equivalent in this sort of broader neurodisability population. We know that so much of the research that has underpinned those international clinical practice guidelines and overviews of systematic reviews have had a much larger proportion of more of those children functioning within GMFCS levels 1, 2 and 3. And so there's so little research that's been conducted, particularly in those children functioning within GMFCS levels 4 and 5. And so, there's a big need for more research in that population. And again, sort of similar to translating some of the information from the cerebral palsy population to the broader neurodisability population, we sort of have had to do that a little bit for the international practice guidelines from the GMFCS 1, 2 and 3 into the GMFCS 4 and 5 using those same principles, even though there's been a smaller amount of research conducted in them in that population. And so, and a really important part of that is that we know these children have reduced levels of physical activity compared to their more mobile peers, and that reduced participation, in part as a result of that. And there's a real need we've got some wonderful physical activity guidelines for children with cerebral palsy from Olaf Schuren and colleagues that help to guide how we can try to reduce sedentary activity, reduce sedentary behaviours for these children, and take opportunities to increase levels of physical activity for sort of long-term health and outcomes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I love how you bring everything together. So we know you want to capture the GMFCS 3s to 5s. It's capturing neurodisability, not just cerebral palsy.
Beautiful.
And we know about starting early, hence the kindy moves. It's all in that early intervention timing. Can you tell us a bit more about what kindy moves is? And what makes up a kindy move session?
Sure, I don't know if I would summarise it as well as Dana did in the intro, but so kindy moves, it's great fun. It was a wonderful, wonderfully fun intervention as a clinician, and we hope for the children and families as well. But kindy moves essentially was an intensive, goal-directed, group-based school preparedness program. Lots of words. So
here we go again.
So basically, these children working towards their individual goals related to mobility, communication or socialization, and hand or upper limb function in the context of preparing for school as these 2 to 5-year-old children going into their early schooling years. It was individualized to each child. It was in a group-based setting, and it implemented and brought in all of those components of what's best current available evidence in terms of high intensity repeated practice of movements that the child is generating and doing that in a really fun, motivating, playful setting with peers so that they had the opportunity to practice those skills as well. And so specifically it was broken up into 3 main sections. So the first one was 30 minutes of floor time, similar to how a school day may start, in a group activity on the floor, whether that's reading or singing, introducing one another. And the beauty of this intervention, I suppose, that I didn't mention is that it was interdisciplinary as well. So really this merging or blending of traditional disciplinary boundaries. And so it was a floor time where there was that dedicated opportunity to practice the child's individual communication or socialization goals, but there was also this building in and individualized way to practice the child's hand and upper limb function goals and same mobility goals. If a child's goal was to be able to sit a bit more, mobility or gross motor function goals, sit more independently, that they would be practicing to sit independently while practicing some form of communication in an individualized way and, using their hand to reach for a switch.
Life.
So it's 30 minutes of that floor time, followed by 60 minutes of locomotor training, which is broken up into 30 minutes of partial body weight support treadmill training, and then 30 minutes of overground walking practice in a mobility device or a walking frame. And then lastly, there was 30 minutes of seated tabletop activities where they would really get that strong focus on the hand and upper limb function skills. But again, with that interdisciplinary sort of merging and blending of all goals working in as much as possible integrated in, which is just like real life. Like, a child will walk up to a tabletop, in their walking frame, play with an activity, turn to engage in some form of shared communication with their communication partner, and then continue to walk around with support if needed. So, that sort of sums it up.
Love this.
Beautiful
How enriching
summary.
as well, bringing all of that together.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the inclusion criteria for the study, we've spoken a little bit about this, so just correct me if I'm wrong. But what I've got so far is GMFCS 3s to 5 with neurodisability, ages 2 to 5.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And was there any other inclusion criteria?
Yeah, so the main other inclusion criteria was that the children or families had goals related to mobility, communication and upper limb function.
Okay.
So that was a core part of the intervention, and that they had to have specific goals that they wanted to work towards in that area. Yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the research study design behind this paper?
Yeah, for sure. So it was a single group feasibility study. We assessed all of the children at baseline, immediately post the 4-week intervention, and then a 4-week follow-up assessment period. And as was mentioned at the start, we looked at the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, the goal attainment scaling from a goal point of view for those two, and then the 66-item gross motor function measure and the 10-metre walk test. Yeah.
Nice
and then also,
range.
those elements of feasibility that we looked at in different ways in terms of their acceptability, practicality, implementation, demand.
Yeah.
And then those outcome measures were part of that limited efficacy testing part of the feasibility study. Yeah.
And I really like that. I think it's, again, a good understanding of what the actual intervention is doing, because so much of what intervention would assess and what you want to see is working is outcomes focused only. But if you want to translate this into practice, what it could look like, you actually want to understand, is it practical? Like, can you actually implement all these ideas in theory into real life with real life kids who are in front of you wanting to do what they want to do? I think that's something that's really important. We'll talk a little bit more about the time points in a little bit, because I think once we go through the results, there's a lot to explore with regards to, the actual practicalities and what these results actually mean. So there's a lot of findings to go through. So try your best to go through each of them, and I'm sure we'll linger on a few of them as well. But I guess what were some of your main findings from those outcome measures? Because those are pretty robust outcome measures that you had included. Hey.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose just before touching on the outcome measures, I think it'd be good to just describe a little bit of the results of the sort of demographic in the population that we had, in that, about 60% of the population that we had in the study were functioning within GMFCS levels 4 and 5, and then over 85% functioned within CFCS and MAX levels 4 and 5.
Wow.
So that's Communication Function Classification System and Manual Ability Classification System. So these are children who, so greater than 85% functioning within MAX and CFCS levels 4 and 5. These are children that need significant adaptations or assistance for being a communication sender or receiver, and for upper limb function and engagement. Yeah. And these children as well had about 3/4 of them had co-occurring epilepsy, about a quarter of them had hearing impairment. Sorry, a quarter had vision impairment, and about 10% had hearing impairment as well. So it's a population with complex needs and complex levels of assistance required in their day-to-day lives, and these other associated sort of health conditions. So, and despite that, about 90% of the goals that were set by families were activity-based. So we categorise the goals according to the family of participation-related constructs into activity, capacity and performance, and also participation-related goals. But 90% were activity-based, which just speaks to, despite that complexity in that population, that they were still setting activity-based goals, which was really interesting.
What are your thoughts on that? Why do you think that's the case? I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, to reflect on such a complex presentation. We imagine these kids, as you've described, probably spent a fair bit of their early years probably in hospital, particularly given seizures and things like that. Yet the goals are still very, I guess, activity-based. Did you have any insight into that? I mean, it's not what we looked into, but interesting thoughts. Yeah,
it would be interesting, and there'll be a sort of qualitative part of this study that will be looked at and published in the future as well. But look, I think it's possibly a bit reflective of the age of these children and the population. They're at a time, we look at the GMFM curves, and they are learning and growing and developing and improving in their abilities. They haven't, we know that there's the plateau and into adolescence a significantly, meaningful functional decline as well. So we know they haven't met that plateau or that decline. And so
it's
perhaps
a very hopeful phase still, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's, learning, developing, seeing what skills can be gained and acquired and, why not set these goals and have a good crack at evidence-based intervention at a good dosage and intensity and see can we improve this function and this ability. So perhaps it's a reflection of that and the stage that families may be at with the child's age. And then, perhaps later in life it's maybe more of a focus on participation and adaptations and how can we make this work with the child's current functional ability rather than being younger and being like, let's see where we can get to. Yeah.
I think that's a really nice reflection because when you think about it, setting goals and writing goals together, very family directed, right? And you've got to, as a therapist, when you help write these goals, because sometimes you want to help them to shape it in terms of, what context do you mean and things like that, is that you've got to be really careful as a therapist not to put what your knowledge is onto that because that phase of being hopeful and knowing that we are on that upward trajectory and you don't know what that quite looks like and you spend all this time in hospital, now you're in a phase where in the community, it's a cool thing to reflect that those are the kind of goals they're writing on because one would have expected, I don't know, like it would be really body structure and function maybe, and that's a nice shift to think about activity.
It's true. It's often around. And I think because if it is to work on sitting or standing or supported walking, I think all those things are going to let the child play. Yeah. And ultimately that's where often families want them to head is to have those opportunities that other kids do to best of their ability.
Yeah. And then even just, interestingly, just looking at your GMFCS levels that were included and your CFCS and MAX, there's a lot of barriers. And I don't think you'd often see groups for these kids. I mean, they were still very individualised, right? They still had people individually with them. But it's an interesting reflection to look at the kind of population. So very diverse for sure.
Yeah.
So I think the results really would reflect a lot on that. So with this particular population then, what do you think is the thing that really, as a result from your statistical analysis that really came out for you? Like what was that?
Yeah, geez, hard to sort of pick a top thing, but I guess across all areas, it was really interesting to see that that they improved in their gross motor function, that there were improvements in 10-metre walk test walking speed, and the COPM goals and gas goals as well. So, we had around 85% of children improved to a clinically meaningful extent in their COPM scores, satisfaction and performance scores at post and at follow-up.
Wow.
There was an improvement from their gas scores in terms of about 40% at T2 at post-intervention improved to a clinically meaningful extent, which increased to about 65% at follow-up.
Wow.
And then we used something that maybe we can talk about afterwards, but the gross motor function evolution ratio, which looked at natural evolution in comparison to sort of what we expect from natural growth in gross motor function with the child's change. And so 75% of children improved greater than what was expected from natural evolution at post-intervention. That was down to about 70% at follow-up.
Yep.
And then, around about a third of the children improved to a clinically meaningful extent in their 10-metre walk test time. But there was also a bit of a floor effect that just under half of the children were unable to complete the 10 metres in the 6-minute duration. And so, we discussed in the paper a little bit about possible considerations around using the 6-minute walk test rather than the 10-metre walk test to account for that floor effect. But, they're probably some of the key things.
Well, that's a lot of improvement over time. And I do like all the things that you have put in place for that. So let's take that back and explore some of those individually. When it came to the gas and the improvements that were happening there, so what kind of goals were sort of being set there? Were they largely very activity-based kind of goals as well?
Yep. So very much through so we use the COPM to help set the initial goals for families, and we categorise those according to the different COPM domains. And then that informed the GAS that were developed, as well as being combined with sort of objective observational assessment of the child's ability and where they were at. And just about all of the goals were activity-based. And in terms of, those improvements that we saw, it was an activity-based intervention. It was intensive activity-based intervention. I think what was really interesting was the change from post-intervention to follow-up. We had hands off during that time, and in fact the children also weren't participating in any other locomotor training interventions or any other intensive interventions.
Oh, that was part of the criteria, wasn't it? So during that period of time, so we do know this is the intervention effect.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
That, there was that improvement up to an increased number of participants improve to a clinically meaningful extent in their GAS. And so, are families feeling more able to implement the things that they've seen into practice? Is the child has the child boosted their functional ability level, and then they're practicing that in their home, school, community environment, and getting ongoing incidental practice just spontaneously because they may be motivated or encouraged to do that, and they know that they have that ability now. A lot that could be contributing to it, and it'd be interesting to look at in the future as to the exact mechanisms as to why that is an improvement. We're normally happy if we see a sort of stability and it sort of plateaus out and maintain that ability, but it was interesting to see that improvement at follow-up.
Look, in my head, I already think about the fact that when you look at the key active ingredients of what motor learning is, and I know I sound like a broken record when I talk about this, but active self-initiated, you're trying to get the child to learn how to do it themselves without a therapist around them. So if you are doing that, you are essentially trying to teach that child how they can achieve these things themselves. It's a bit of empowerment, really, like what they can do. And as a result, when we're not around, you would hope that they would want to give it a bit of a go, and they might be more familiar with it. They're not so passive and waiting for something to happen to them.
So good to know that it can just happen in their own context. You've given them, you've empowered, you've given them the ability and the training to develop these skills. And then, do you know what? At school and home, that practices that consistency of the repetition. And like you said, it's self-initiated, it's active.
That's right.
They've got that drive to do it. I think fact that you could maintain those improvements.
And this isn't a population that's largely dependent, by definition, right, reliant on equipment and daily physical assistance. So it usually requires a lot more people around them. So if they're able to do some of the things and initiate more themselves, any small bit actually is a really meaningful difference. So that's a really cool, I like that. And it's so individually specific as well. I'm really interested in the GMFM-ER. What does that actually stand for? So gross motor function measure, and then ER is the
evolution ratio.
Evolution. Okay, so talk us through that and maybe how that differs to the percentiles. Is that a bit mean, but is that part of the question?
No, cool.
Okay. I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating measure that we sort of just stumbled across, really, to be honest. It was developed in 2016 based off the Peter Rosenbaum GMFM curves.
Great.
So we've got the centiles, we've got the curves. This research group from Canada created a formula based off those curves to predict and estimate what level of improvement, natural improvement without intervention, is expected over a defined time period for a particular child. And all you really need, there's an online tool for it, it's really helpful, is you need the child's age, you need their starting gross motor function 66-item GMFM score, and you need the period of intervention or observation. So it's really helpful from non-randomised trial. We can't always do randomised control trials, and if we do, can we say no intervention, from an ethical point of view, and it's, usual care, and what is usual care? So there's for the role of having non-randomised control trials, it's a nice way to be able to look and see, okay, for this 2-year-old short child whose baseline GMFM score was, say, 30, in a 2-month period, they may be expected to improve their GMFM score by 0.5. Okay, we've done an intervention over that time period and they've improved by 3. Okay, so we know that there's that difference in, we're expecting them to already, just by pure natural maturation and development, that they were going to improve by 0.5 score on the GMFM, and they've now made this change. So it helps to just get a bit of a better idea as to what is natural maturation versus possible effects of your intervention. So, in this feasibility study, we didn't have a control group that controlled for maturation as best as possible. And it was just another way that we could come in and get a bit of a better idea as to, is what we've done due to natural maturation? Because it's a young age group, peak, time of neuroplasticity and growth, and that GMFM curve is steep. Is it due to natural maturation, or a bit of a better idea if it's due to the intervention itself?
Yeah. You've explained that beautifully. That was really good.
And I love that it takes that into consideration. I think that just highlights even more the improvements that you've made. You've compared it to what is going to happen in this early age group. Like you said, they're at the point on those GMFCS curves where there's a lot of change happening. So to be able to contrast the effect of the intervention using those curves is great. So
and the statistics are really impressive, actually. And I know that there was some blinding in this as well, wasn't there? Do you want to explain some of the blinding?
Yeah. So the the GMFM the assessor was blinded to assessment time points for that. So in terms of just helping to reduce the risk of bias of that. Look, again, it wasn't a double-blinded randomised controlled trial, but where possible, we reduced the possible impact of bias on that. And again, I think, that combined with using this evolution ratio helps to increase our certainty that the effects that we've seen in these GMFM changes are perhaps more true reflection of the effect of the intervention. We can't say for certain it's on an RCT, but it's a better idea.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's 40 participants, so I think it gives a really good idea. Now, the one that really gets excited, do you want to talk about the 10-minute walk test?
That's what I was going to, I was going to go there. Okay, I love that so capturing GMFCS 3s to 5 or equivalent and getting kids up on their feet in walkers, having opportunities to take steps and be active, and now talking about the 10-metre walk test. Can you talk me through those results?
Yeah, for sure. So children improved, around a third improved to a clinically meaningful extent.
What's the clinically meaningful extent? What's that number?
0.1 metres per second. So also recognising some limitations in that a clinically meaningful outcome may not be the same for every every population and every age group.
Yes.
That can change. And as a whole, the group improved from pre to post and pre to follow-up assessment. And look, it's an interesting thing because, are we expecting children functioning within GMFCS levels 4 and 5 to make such a huge improvement that they are walking independently in their walker in all settings? No, like we know that their main form of mobility in the community will be using wheelchair or wheeled mobility in some way.
Yeah.
But what it has done and what we hope the kind of long-term outcome of this sort of intervention and some improvements in walking speed would result in is that these children are more able to and capable to and willing to engage in upright physical activity opportunities. And so, now that they can take a few more independent steps and propel a little bit better independently, can they spend a little bit longer in their walker? So they're spending less time in their chair, a little bit less sedentary, they're working hard, and can they use that to walk up to a bench top and be able to play with a toy and use that as a really enriching environment to be able to participate and be around and be at eye level with some of their peers and be in a different position to sitting in their chair.
And I think it really highlights the potential for these children, GMFCS 3 to 5, to be able to have some form of, active participation and active mobility in an upright position. Whereas I guess in the past, a lot of their time upright is more of a passive positioning.
It's true, yeah.
And in the past, it's something I know we could delve down more and more in our podcast in the past with Sue Stott, the orthopaedic surgeon, about, hips and hip management. And, we've got kids up in the past and standing frames to weight bear, but this is getting them up, getting them weight bearing, but they're active. Their muscles
and
are
the complex presentation group.
The group that otherwise would not have this opportunity.
Yeah.
So I think this is just starts the ball rolling more and more to see, what these children are capable of.
What we're hoping to achieve as well. And it's interesting even that that 0.1 metre per second clinically meaningful still wants, we should probably look at that and revise that for this population as well, because that was largely done. That's the Booth article, isn't it? Is that I can't remember exactly that one. I think the 2016 one maybe comes to mind. Is that the one?
Yeah, 2016. Offering a Booth.
Something like that. Yeah, and then I think a lot of that population was GMFCS. Includes GMFCS 1 and 2 as well, but not really 4 and 5, which hasn't really been done. So I think this is one of the. I would say this would be one of the first articles I've seen that includes 10-metre walk tests for this population, which is interesting. And you talked a little bit about the ceiling effect. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so essentially that, I believe it was 18 out of the 40 participants that were in our study didn't complete the 10 metres within the allocated 6-minute time frame. And so that meant that each of those children got given a 360-second sort of capped time frame. So, that data was a little bit skewed by that. Yeah, exactly. And so there are some limitations in that in this population, and we suggest in the article, but definitely, is a good area for future research as to how to capture functional walking ability in this population. Is it the 6-minute walk test? Is it another sort of measure of walking ability? Yeah. Some of these children can work really hard to initiate steps, but they just might not be able to propel independently, but they're still up and they're trying to step.
Yes.
And is it on carpet or is it on a tiles? It changes what kind of walker they have. So
sure.
I think there's
So
scope
many
so many variables and a good scope to explore that and figure out how we can capture and assess and measure those sort of responses. Yeah,
it's true, right? Because when you think about a general household, most people's homes, like in terms of lounge rooms and where their walker might be, they might really just be taking 3 or 4, like maybe walking 3 or 4 meters to get from one spot to the other to play and pot about. And, you're not necessarily talking about long distances, but, you think about the on-time mobility framework, you think about soleus, you're thinking about weight bearing, 20, 30 minutes possibly on their feet because that was your overground time. That's pretty great from that perspective, but interesting about that measure. And I agree. I think a 6-minute walk test would capture that at least without that effect.
I just want to draw to, obviously because this was a feasibility study, but just even points that I was reading in your results in terms of you had such a high attendance rate. So obviously the families and the children were really engaged and obviously wanting to come and saw the value in the intervention. And there was also no adverse rates. So obviously getting them up was safe and everyone tolerated the sessions well. And these are just all important factors, I think, when you get that active buy-in, you know that the parents are obviously seeing a benefit and the child in terms of coming to the sessions.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, historically and in the literature, this population have received compensatory approaches and almost, what does it come from? Is it a fear to get them to work too hard or get the heart rate up and to do activity-based interventions? And look, we had a complex population with those associated impairments and other health conditions. And there were no adverse effects. And they attended 91% of sessions, which is, they've
incredible.
They're either, they could have hospital appointments, they could have hospitalizations. Like there's so much going on for these families. So I think Marissa, as you said, to be able to see the value in that intervention, but also that the children tolerated it and it was a fun, play-based environment. The children were engaged and enjoying it and learning and developing in a beautiful group-based setting. Complex population but no adverse effects and families kept showing up.
What do you think about the dosage? I mean, I feel like we talk about dosage a lot. I know you're embarking on a systematic review looking at dosage, so it's probably all in your head as well, which is great. Stay tuned for that. We will talk to you about that soon.
6 months. 6 months maybe. give me a bit, Dana.
Okay, I'll give you some time on that one.
Get in there.
But dosage is interesting. So the intervention dosage for this was 3 2-hour sessions, 3 times a week for 4 weeks. Look, we've read a lot of other papers before where the dosage is something closer to like 60 hours. You do hear of certain practices that provide 3, 4, 5 hours a day for very young children over 2-3 weeks, very, very condensed. So looking at this dosage, it's not a lot compared to that. It's still intensive, definition intensive is, looking at least 3 sessions. What are your comments on that? What are your thoughts about dosage?
Yeah, as you say, I'm interested in it. I'm passionate about it, and I'd really love to be able to answer that question, hopefully in maybe a few more months' time. But I think without knowing for sure what the answer is to what the perfect dosage is, and we may never know that in terms of the heterogeneity of individuals, how many goals they set, what else is going on, who they are as a child and what's required to achieve the goals that they want. But I think, there are also studies, so there's the ones that have 60, 70, 80, 90 hours, but also the ones that only have 12. And, many of these studies still all report clinically meaningful improvements. So what is the minimum required dosage for our study? Look, I think it had a nice balance in that these children had opportunity to rest. It wasn't every single day. They had opportunity to rest and to put into practice some of the things at home that they've been doing in the environment, but also just to rest. They've forgotten school afterwards or daycare or whatever afterwards, and to be able to have these intensive block. It seemed to be practical and feasible and acceptable to families to attend for this 4-week period to still have rest in between days, and while hopefully still having the adequate or the a suitable amount to have clinically meaningful improvement. So it's a balance and it's a tricky thing. I'd love to know the answer, but in a complex population, they attended. Families stated it was practical and feasible, and they still had meaningful improvements while being able to rest.
So you'd have to really question in terms of doing much more. Like I think that is when you were talking about that, I was thinking about the lovely Suze Latau, who we've had on the show before, talking about LALIP and language and literacy in young people. And she's very interested in dosage and always talks to me about the different elements of dosage. And but she often talks about the opportunity cost. Whenever you are taking time to do therapy, if we think about the F words, there is always an exchange, right? Because time is a rare commodity. Are you exchanging time with friends and family, and what does that mean for the parents? So when we talk about that practicality aspect of things, you're talking not just about the kids but the parents, and what does that mean for the whole family? And it's always something that's worthwhile thinking about. Like if you're going to do much more, why and what are some of those outcomes? And I think it's a good conversation piece, I think, that we need to talk about more rather than take a stab in the dark and go, I guess 30 hours or, like where does it come from? And we've got some guides and it's just about balancing it all. I think you've said it really nicely there.
That kind of leads me on to my next question, which is where to from here? So you've touched on a few things, and there's obviously things around dosage, and there's a lot more we could talk about. But Matt, what future studies do you think would follow nicely from here?
Yeah, sure. So I think firstly an RCT or perhaps a single subject research design of Kindy Moves would be wonderful. This was a feasibility study, very, very much looking to see if this would work for families while showing some promise for being effective. So to be able to establish that, and part of that to look at the long-term outcomes, ideally, could we figure out if this really does help the transition into school? Does it help with their participation? Do families feel more empowered to support their child to be upright and moving while working on their communication and upper limb function goals? Long-term follow-up would be needed for that. That's one thing that would be wonderful. Yeah. The dosage side of things that you talked about, to figure out exactly what's required and how much or how little, how much is too much, but also what's enough to make those changes would be wonderful to know. And I'm really interested and passionate about it. I'd love more and more research to be conducted in, there's my OT colleagues and speech pathology colleagues may want to focus on the upper limb function or communication side of things. I'm like, let's get these children functioning within GMFCS levels 4 and 5 up and moving, reduce prolonged periods of sedentary activity and give them the opportunity to stand and exercise and see what happens when we do that at an early age. Can we change that peak gross motor function level before they plateau and functionally decline into adolescence? Can we reduce the impact of that by intervening appropriately early with the right dosage?
That's really cool.
Very cool. Well,
lots of things I think about there, aren't they? Or keep you busy.
Yeah, that and the systematic review will between them.
I really love that. Well, look, we're not done yet, of course. We're going to head into our next segment where we bring it all together. Let's go to Tell It to Ed. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he has been listening, taking notes, taking a note of our time, making sure we're doing well here, I'd say. But he would be very interested in knowing all more about this. So, Matt, can you please summarise this in about 60 seconds? And, Ed, you'll have time for one question.
Awesome.
Take it away.
Ed, more and more I question how laymen, researchers who come onto here need to make things when you come back with a response that is, very much not layman and very intellectual, but I will try to keep things simple and your question and response will hopefully be
Watch the size of his head. He's not going to get out of the studio.
I know. Okay, so here goes. Ed, there's been such little research that's been conducted in 2 to 5-year-old children with neurological disabilities who need equipment such as wheelchairs or walking frames and assistance throughout their day. And this 2 to 5-year-old age group is a time of rapid learning and development where, it warrants early intervention to support transition into a school environment. So we explored and developed a new program called the Kindy Moves intervention. Kindy Moves was an intensive group-based program that was conducted 3 times per week, 2-hour sessions for 4 weeks, which involved children practicing their individual goals related to mobility, communication or socialisation, and hand play. And they did that in a really interactive and playful group, school-like environment. What we found was that there was demand for this intervention, that it was safe and practical and acceptable for children and families, and that these children, on average, achieved their goals and improved in their functional ability levels. So what we saw is that children with neurological disabilities who have complex health needs can safely complete such an intensive intervention like this. And so we need more research from here to explore the long-term impact of this kind of intervention. We need to include more children who have reduced levels of independent mobility in research. And I think we also need to figure out what the minimum therapy dosage is, so in minutes or hours or weeks, to achieve meaningful functional outcomes.
Very good.
Very good.
Well done. All righty. Ed, over to you. I've got no idea what he's going to ask here.
Well, I have to say that this is an episode that I've managed to follow very well. So it was explained very, very well. And everyone seems equally passionate about the results of this particular study. It comes across as some sort of seminal piece of work that will probably be the building block for things into the future. So with that in consideration, I'd love to know what your thoughts are about being a new graduate doing such a piece of research and how that's kind of shaped your concept of how clinical work in this area should be done, with reflection on the kind of research that you've been a part of.
Oh,
Reflective.
It's a bit open-ended, but it's a softball question, I feel.
How long do you have, Ed? All right.
I think we've got about 9 minutes.
It's a great question. So I've been a physio for, I think I'm in my 4th year out now, and I've worked in a range of different areas. I think being involved in this sort of research, you learn the building blocks and a base starting point in uni. And certainly this type of intervention was like nothing I'd ever heard of or sort of really seen since. And I think it is really unique, and it's encouraged me to think as a clinician of not just what the norm is and what other people have done in the past, and so therefore just do that, but to, look at what else could be done, what more could we do, why, yes, use the research that you've had in the past, but explore new innovative ways of thinking. And I think as a clinician, I've been in situations where I just sort of step back a little bit and look at a situation and think like, okay, something's not working here. What else could we try based on the best kind of available evidence and research, but thinking a little bit different and a little bit creative and innovative. The second part of your question, Ed, was?
Just about what kind of impact research has on your way of thinking, given that you were a part of this really early on in your career.
Yeah. And I think with that, I've been fortunate to be in teams and environments and workplaces that research is sort of everything, that's your starting point, and then you can build on your own clinical experience and, listen to the people who have their clinical experience and put that all together with the family's views and values and what they want to work towards. So I think that those teams that I've been fortunate to be part of have helped research to be the core and the focus and the starting point. And to have that early in my career has been a great privilege, and I feel like I've learned so much from that and find myself constantly reading research and still wanting to be involved in research even if it's not in a formal setting. So having done it early in my career, it's piqued my interest. It's wanted me to continue to be involved, and I've met so many wonderful researchers who are much further down the track than me, and so many wise people who are creative, innovative thinkers, and it inspires me to do the same in the future. We'll continue to try to do the same.
Deep question, Ed. Definitely didn't see that one coming.
No, but I never know what's coming. So we'll answer that. You did well.
Yeah, no, that was really good. And that speaks to how exceptional you are as a new graduate to having done this in your final year of university, and to be part of this and write it up in such a way and speak of it so well as well really speaks to how exceptional you are as a clinician and as an early researcher too. So wait to see more, everyone. I think it'll be really cool.
I'm excited, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. Well, to all of our listeners, look, we'll put a link to this paper online, researchworks.net. This is an open access paper, so you'll be able to access it very easily. And of course, we have a PD form that you can fill out as well if you want to keep this as part of a record of your CPD requirements. But for now, we'll say thank you very much, Matt. Thanks for coming into the studio. It was a lot of fun. Everyone knows about your pea and ham soup thing now and that you eat it cold.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Just stoked.
So
Stoked
great.
if that's the take home for today, that's wonderful.
Microwave your food.
Yeah, that's right. No, but thank you very much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me. It's
Thanks,
been great.
Matt.
Yeah, it's so good. And to all our listeners, thank you once again, and we'll talk to you all again next time. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.